Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Central Hampshire Veterans Services television show. This is our third episode. Our first episode, we talked about benefits for both state and federal. And we had a conversation about Vietnam veterans. And last month, I had a special guest on again, John Parody, and we talked about the potential closing of the VA hospital and what's going on at the Holyoke Soldiers Home. That was a very intriguing conversation, and I hope folks got a lot out of it. A little update on both of those things. The legislation for the Holyoke Soldiers Home is still sitting in conference committee, and nothing has come released on that. But we're waiting. It's got to happen by the end of July, or else it gets carried over, and I don't think they want to carry it over. On the VA side, just about 2 weeks ago on a Friday, it was the Friday of Memorial Day weekend. That'll tell you something. That's usually when they don't want things being really reported and told, because who's paying attention on a Friday and a 3-day weekend? They're probably driving somewhere. But what had happened was the House had passed, and it's gone to the Senate, and it looks like it's going to pass legislation dealing with air quality. It's basically legislation, federal legislation dealing with the returning veterans who were exposed to toxins from both burn pits, and there was a place in one of the stands in south of Russia where there was jet fuel and all of these toxins in there, and it used to be a Russian base. So the people who have been exposed and lived on those bases, this new legislation is going to address those needs. What that's going to do is have a huge influx of veterans who are going to be eligible for health care services, and specific ones because of these toxins and these disabilities that they're causing. They project that they're going to need to build 38 new VA healthcare facilities. Well, if you've already spent over $100 million on the one in Leeds, sounds kind of crazy that you would close that to then build another one nearby. The battle goes on. I know our representative here in this part of Western Mass, Representative McGovern, has spoken with the Secretary of Veteran Affairs, and has brought up the issues about what's already been done up there, how there's only like 2 buildings that haven't been touched, and all the stuff that's been done. So hopefully the voices are being heard, and this idea of closing will go away, and we will keep our hospital where it is. It's going to be still down from what it was 30 years ago, but it is a facility, and it meets the needs of my veterans throughout Hampshire County, both in the hill towns and the lower communities. So that's a quick update on that. Again, folks, if you think you might be eligible for veterans benefits, don't hesitate to call my office. Our central office is in Northampton. Phone number is 413-587-1299, or you can email us at vetadmin, VETADMIN, at northamptonma.gov, and just reach out. If you don't know if you're eligible, if you are the surviving spouse of a veteran, or you're still married and you don't know what your benefits are, please contact our office. That's what we're there for. We help people with financial assistance, housing issues, and anything on top of that, whether it's applying for cemeteries, VA benefits. That's what we're there for. So please feel free to reach out to us. And that's what we're there for, is to provide those things. Again, the towns, if you're watching this, you probably know you're one of the towns, but I'll just go through it really quick. I start over in Pelham, Amherst, Hadley, Northampton, then Williamsburg, Goshen, Cummington, Chesterfield, Worthington, Middlefield, and Chester. Those are the communities that we work with. So if you live in those communities, feel free to contact us. If you don't know who to contact in any other community, call us. We can usually refer you to who you're supposed to see. But we have a wide array of services, and we're here for you. So on to the topic of today's program. As many of you know, we just got done with Memorial Day. Memorial Day services at the end of May. And many of the communities have something to mark that day. One of the great confusions since I've taken over this job nearly 20 years ago is pointing out the difference between Memorial Day and Veterans Day. It's not always clear with people, so it's always a struggle. But what I've really noticed, especially recently, that, you know, the whole meeting sometimes gets lost of what the days are and why the days are. And so I brought in a friend. He has helped me several years up in Williamsburg to present Memorial Day and Veterans Day. He's also a veteran himself, and you're a major?
Yes.
You're a major in the National Guard.
Army Reserves.
Army Reserves, excuse me.
That's all right.
Too many
Wasn't the
things
National Guard, moved to the Reserves.
Moved to the Reserves.
Yep.
And all of this kind of stuff is of interest to you as well.
Yeah.
And so he has a whole lot more historical data than I do. I have the life I've lived, and being the son of a veteran who was very involved with these things, I have some history. But I was speaking, I forgot to give you his name. Dan Nye. You live in Williamsburg?
I live in Williamsburg, yes.
All right, Daniel Nye, and you have a wife and two lovely daughters that are a trip, who I saw on Memorial Day.
Yep.
So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So the subject of Memorial Day and how it's going was very apparent. And if anybody regularly goes to these types of parades and ceremonies, you'll notice that there's less and less veterans participating in these events. Why that is, if it trends up and down, that's the conversation I'm going to now start with Dan. Dan, I see things over the last 20 years, and I also go all the way back over, I'd have to say like 55 years ago, when I was a little kid and my father participated in ceremonies on Memorial Day starting very early in the morning, and it went on through noon.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, Memorial Day was on the 31st.
Right.
It wasn't a Monday holiday. That hadn't happened yet. My father would go to all the cemeteries in the city with other veterans. They would lay a wreath, they'd do a salute, so on and so forth. They'd do a prayer, they might do part of Logan's orders, and then they'd move on to the next cemetery. Then they would go to Florence and they'd march in the Florence Parade. Then they'd all gather back up and they'd come down here to Northampton to do the Northampton Parade. Mm-hmm. And then they'd end at Bridge Street Cemetery, the final cemetery where they'd lay a wreath. And flags were down at half staff. Stores, everything was closed until noon. And then after 12 o'clock, everything opened up and everybody went on with their day. That was in existence until about 72, 73, when they signed it over to make it a Memorial Day, a Monday holiday. They also did the same with Veterans Day. And we'll get into that history, but the origin of Memorial Day, it was actually called Decoration Day.
It was.
Correct?
Yeah, so General John Logan, you mentioned briefly, was a Union general during the Civil War. After the war, he became the, I believe, third commander of the Grand Army of the Republic, which was kind of the predecessor to the American Legion Veterans of Foreign Wars. It was a Union veterans organization. And he, 1868, declared for the Grand Army of the Republic the first National Decoration Day. That was, there's a lot of stories about the various origins of it, largely in the South, some from freed slaves decorating the graves of Union soldiers who'd been killed. The only one that we can definitively trace it back from Logan's orders is from Columbus, Georgia in 1866. A women's organization there posted in several newspapers a call for a national decoration day. And so a couple years later, as the head of the GAR, General Logan declared that the first, and it caught on rapidly. If you go back into any of the local newspapers, which we've talked. I
Right.
did a little bit with the Hampshire Gazette, which thankfully is at least up through 1900 digitized, so we can go back and actually see both the way it was described and as well as some of the speeches, how it was done. And so it caught on very rapidly. Interestingly, we talk about Decoration Day a lot. Excuse me. And talk about how that name stuck for a while, but in looking at it, Memorial Day by 1870, it was already referring to as Memorial Day. And that kind of stuck a lot more than Decoration Day. Sometimes they're used interchangeably, but it remained largely a Civil War veteran holiday. Eventually, a lot of states started having businesses closed on those days, or the business owners themselves decided to. But within a short amount of time, there were complaints from veterans that people weren't showing up for those services. It was largely processions of Union veterans and, their families.
So
going to
like
those.
today I have some of my communities have parades, and there's not many people on the street.
Right.
And it's usually their family members of those marching.
Yeah, a lot of times. Yep. So so what you talked about seeing as a kid, I grew up around that as well in the hill towns, and it's usually the American Legion would go to the cemeteries and conduct those. And that's kind of ebbed and flowed over the years. I mean, obviously both world wars had a tremendous impact on turning it into both a national holiday that celebrated all war dead beyond the Civil War. But also, every time you've had a major conflict, you have a large influx of new veterans to fill out those ranks in those organizations. And so I think you mentioned like how you've seen it drop off quite a bit. I think a large part of that is actually the fact that, for you growing up, and even me as well, we had World War II, and we had, Korea and Vietnam,
Right.
and the number of veterans that came out of those conflicts just filled the ranks of those parades and those ceremonies. Williamsburg itself, if you look at our memorial, you'll see about maybe 20 or so service members who served during the entirety of the war on terrorism over the past 20 years. You look at World War II, which lasted about 4.5 years,
Right.
you have over 200 names on there. So
Right,
there was a
right.
mass mobilization for national service that resulted in a much higher percentage of the population being veterans, or if not veterans, having direct ties to service members. Right. And so
And that, and that is a whole nother issue because of the divide between the civilian world or the non-veteran world and the veteran world. And that because there's so many less veterans that have served, they served over and over again, and it's really created a divide. Granted, the young, since 9/11, those veterans are honored, unlike the Vietnam veteran,
Right.
who really felt like they weren't honored. But there's still a huge divide.
And it's interesting too, though, then that even if going back looking at that, you can actually see that in both the newspaper articles and the speeches. We've talked before, but about the idea that because of that divide, there's a sense of, especially amongst the veterans community, you see it today, whether it's memes or whether it's just, statements saying, in case you thought it was National Barbecue Day or something, showing like a woman
Right.
laying by her husband's stone in a military cemetery.
Yeah.
And that sentiment has been there since the Civil War veterans, amongst some veterans. And so, again, you see that ebb and flow because as veterans of one conflict die, the personal connection is lost to that. But today, with an all-volunteer service that's much smaller, even despite 2 wars over the past 20 years, you just don't see that connection, especially in the North, like in the Northeast especially, where if you look at the breakdown of percentages for where military service members come from these days, overwhelmingly higher percentage from the South. Mm-hmm. And so in our communities, you just don't have that connection. Veterans organizations, whether it's Legion or VFW, you'll find a very small number of younger veterans. Far more veterans these days will come out of service and end up going to school somewhere else and starting a life outside of whatever community they grew up in. That's
Right.
not just a veteran problem. That's something we see all over.
Right,
Across,
right.
But I think those are all factors in some of the change we see.
And we don't have bases
We
up
don't.
here like most of them are down in the
After
South
the
and
closures of
West.
the early 1990s, Fort
Yeah.
Devens was like the last New England large-scale military base, and that closed down in the early 90s. So you don't have a large number of active duty
Right.
military
In
the
Western
area.
Mass, you have the reserves over in
Right.
Westover and
Yeah.
the Guard over at Barnes.
Yeah.
So,
and a couple small places here and there. But yeah, it's
Right.
not as prominent a part of daily life in this area as it may have been at one time. But it's, again, that sentiment isn't anything new. You go back even to the 1880s, and you have people veterans particularly, lamenting the fact that they don't feel that people are celebrating Memorial Day with the proper amount of solemnity that the veterans felt they should. But we had talked before, and I mentioned there's one of the best Memorial Day speeches that you'll likely ever come across. It's a bit long and it's a bit wordy, but it was written by Oliver
Well,
Wendell.
if you ever read all of General Logan's orders, speaking
Exactly.
of wordy and long.
It's the 19th century, so you
Yeah.
kind of expect that. But Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. wrote this fantastic speech that was given to a group of veterans, and essentially the gist of it was, veterans don't need to be reminded about why this day is important, why this is a solemn day, because there's no forgetting the people you lost. There's no forgetting that bond between those people. And so while we can get worked up about the fact that maybe people aren't honoring it with the solemnity we wish they would, how do you impart your feelings on another person? How do veterans bridge that divide that existed even then?
Right.
Not to say, do this because this is why it's important, but to say, listen to what I have to say. Listen to my stories about these men. Listen to our feelings on the subject. And if nothing else, sympathize with those feelings. And I think that's something that has been a continuous struggle.
Yeah,
to
it has
this day.
been. I mean, I've been hearing it on and off my whole life.
Right.
And, it's the struggle I'm now having with, who is Memorial Day for? And in a sense, it really is for other veterans, because they want to remember their brother in arms, the person that gave it all, and they want to honor them and remember them. But part of them wants everybody else to remember them too.
Right.
And if it's not a shared experience, it is a struggle to make that happen.
Yeah, and so,
It's definitely-
something we've worked on in some of the Memorial Days we've worked together is humanizing the day, I guess, is the way to put it.
And making sure the speaker talks about Memorial Day and not just the veteran world.
Right.
Right.
Broad themes of patriotism and whatnot. But, you look at our memorial in Williamsburg, and again, there's over 200 names on that plaque for World War II. But on the top, centrally located above all the others, is the almost dozen who were either killed in the war or died of disease or something to that effect. And so for me, when I talk to people there about it, that's how I distinguish between the 2 days. Memorial Day is just for them.
Right.
It's not about our service. It's not about the service of those other 200 people on there. It's a day to remember them because of the fact that, while we may do a roll call for the veterans who've died in the past year, the real reason for the holiday is to recognize those people who didn't have the opportunity to have a full life.
Right. And one of the things we did in Williamsburg, we also did down in Florence, which the state of Massachusetts has now come out with a new medal. It's called Medal of Liberty. It's been around for a few years, but we talked and we worked out how to give it to some of the family members of those that have passed. And in Florence, I think both families were Vietnam veterans, but I can't promise I'm correct about that because I just did too many of them. And we had four. In Williamsburg.
Yes.
And that's a way to kind of connect current people to the sacrifices that were made, because these people, these veterans or these service members died and never came home, and the families always had to deal with that trauma and that consequence.
A few years back I was the speaker for one of the Memorial Days we did, and there's this quote that's attributed to, unfortunately, to Joseph Stalin of all people, and his intent with the quote is very different than the way it relates to this. But it was one death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic. And what ends up happening a lot of times on every Memorial Day I've seen is one of the speakers gets up and says, this is to remember the 600,000 who were killed in the Civil War, and the 150,000 in World War I, and the 240,000 in World War II, and so on. And it's important to recognize the magnitude of loss, but people don't relate to numbers.
Right.
And so something we've tried to do, and something that the Massachusetts Medal of Liberty gives us an excellent opportunity to do, is focus on those individuals and tell their stories. Because if I tell the story of a guy who was 19 years old and had just graduated from Williamsburg High School and worked at such and such a place, and whose family members are still here who they might remember,
Right.
then it hits in an entirely different way that is much closer to what we as veterans have a tendency to think of. When we think of our individual friends, or people we
Right.
grew up with, or somebody who was who our grandfather was best friends with, whatever, and it just allows that to become a more personal event. So that's at least what I try to do, and have been trying to do lately.
Yeah, and so for me, I started in Northampton 4 years before I took over any other towns, and the Florence Parade was always big. And looking back at pictures and other articles, and the one article you had shown me, which was the second anniversary of Decoration Day,
Yep.
about how veterans left Memorial Hall, Grand Army of the Republic built it, which is where my office is, and they marched up to Florence and to Leeds, to all the cemeteries, and went up to Williamsburg, and they congregated, and it went on all morning into the afternoon, and they ended up over in Hatfield and down into Hadley, and then returned. But they got meals, and it was like,
Right.
this was a day's event. And that was just the second annual. But what veterans, disabled or not, did because of that. And then I think about our Florence Parade, which is a procession, and we've done it every year. We hold the record for the longest continuous running
Right.
Memorial Day parade on Memorial Day, because I remember this huge storm where there was hail and it was awful. I was walking along the parade route with my dad, because that's when I hung out with him.
Right.
And they did it no matter what, and there was only a few, which is what we did during the pandemic. But when it's a nice day, the place is packed, and especially in the center, it goes deep. And one of the reasons is that I have a lot of young people and children in their groups in that parade,
Right.
which is great to have them part of it. But I always struggle, because I'm like, did I show them anything? Did they learn anything about what Memorial Day is and why they're in this parade? And do their families know? Or it's like a funeral procession. So the one thing that sends me into orbit is when a group starts throwing candy. Not only is it unsafe, but to me it's disrespectful. And I'm struggling, and a lot of vets, that's why we used to do it in front of the Civic Center in Florence, near the library. And about 10, 12 years ago, we went, no, we've got to have it in the cemetery. And that's where the ceremony is, because that's where the Civil War soldiers were, and that's where
Right.
we're trying to honor
Well, and
people who
I
died.
think that's the thing is to some extent you can't expect the civilian population, especially in a time where so few have direct connection to the military, to understand that without us reaching out as veterans to impart, like we talked about that speech, our feelings about the day. You can't just say this is why, is because it's a day to honor the dead. You don't. They told stories.
Right.
And again, the dynamic's a little bit different, because you talk about 1868. I mean, these veterans are probably mostly between the ages of, say, 21 and 35.
Right.
This is a young group of guys. It's not the old,
Right.
long white-bearded Civil War veterans that we think of in later years. It would be akin to, hundreds of, war on terrorism veterans in each town marching today.
Right.
That's going to hit a little different than
Right.
than it does these days. And so I think there's a place for both. A lot of times, look at, say, New Orleans style funerals.
Right,
It can be a
right.
joyous event
Right.
as long as there's a certain amount of respect paid to what the intent is.
Right.
I'm always, I had my struggles with it, but I've tried to become more understanding of the side, and not too harshly critical
Right.
of people who don't understand, because who's going to explain it to them other than us?
Right.
And
Well, you know, one of the ideas that we're tossing around is, like in Northampton and even in Amherst, I talked with some people in Amherst, is do we have a Memorial Day procession and then have a ceremony for the veterans and those family members and have a Independence Day celebration? You know, and people who live in Northampton, weigh in if you have thoughts, or Amherst. But having a 4th of July parade, which would involve the kids, and it seems like that's a much more appropriate time to throw candies and celebrate because it's our birthday versus a solemn day. And I'm looking for people's opinions on that. Our Veterans Council is trying to figure that out. I know in Williamsburg, we march. It's not a long route. There's not a lot of people on the parade route, but when we get in there, that Memorial Park is filled with people, and they are very respectful, and that's what they want.
Right.
And that's what I want to try to do. And again, my concern is there's less and less veterans, and unless we go back to a draft or whatever, it's going to probably stay that way because people make it a career. Like yourself, you could get called up anytime
Right.
and go to do a stint, a year or something. And so you don't have a draft, and you don't have people going in large numbers. So I just don't know going forward as we honor veterans, whether it's Memorial Day, Veterans Day, or whatever the day might be, what the future holds for that. And I don't know if it's going to ebb and flow anymore, but maybe it will.
I mean, we all hope it won't, you know,
Right.
flow again. But, you know, I think ultimately what it comes down to is community engagement. Like you said, you have groups who participate in that each year. Now, I don't know exactly how that gets organized, but just a sit-down table discussion with those leaders to express your feelings about those might be a way to go. But yeah, I mean, you don't really have a choice at this point but to make it a more of a community event and involve those non-military, non-veteran leaders, because I mean, that's what we have. Otherwise, it's left to the very few, as we have been doing, a very, very small number of people doing quite a bit of work.
Yeah. And actually, many of the American Legion members, VFW members that I work with, many of them are Vietnam veterans or older, and they're all in their 70s. And geez, I'm in my early 60s. That means, you know, you're a youngster compared to, you know, for everybody else. So it is. I've had some of the other organizations, like the Kiwanis Club of Northampton, help out with flags. We had a group from a couple years ago that came out from Coca-Cola. They wanted to do something. So there's plenty of room for people to participate and help out. We also got the Key Club, which is a high school equivalent, and they came out and did flags. And they had an important moment. A few of the young women were walking with their flags, and there was an older woman in her car, and she called them over and said, "What are you doing?" And they told her who they were, and you know they were doing it. And she goes, "Oh well, you know, my big brother is buried here. He was part of the liberation of now I'm going to say it. I can't remember it. The concentration camp in Germany.
Oh, there's quite a few.
Auschwitz.
Okay. Yeah.
So she explained that to these young women, and they didn't know what Auschwitz was. And she was a little bit flabbergasted. But she also came to me after and said they were very impressive and very respectful, and really wanted to know what my older brother did, and that's why I'm here. And so there is that disconnect, but it's nice to know that there are people out there that are interested in you. These young people were and are. So I guess that's the way we go. But I'm still trying to toy with the idea of Independence Day parade versus Memorial Day parade with all the kids involved. But I'll take other people's opinions out there, what they think. Again, the struggle is also, you got Memorial Day, and then we go on to Veterans Day, which is supposed to be a celebration of honoring those that did serve and came home. The attendance on that, and I think a lot of it is because it's in November. You almost wish that the holidays were switched.
Yeah.
You know, weather-wise, because in November people freeze on Main Street, so they're not out watching the veterans march up. There's so many less of them. I think I have like 6 veterans that will march. One of them is a Korean War veteran. He's 93 and he hasn't missed a parade. He impresses. Howard Anderson is his name, but most people don't walk, and I don't know about Veterans Day parades anymore because it really is. Those that want to march are just veterans.
Right.
Civic groups, and especially children's groups, they don't want to go out in the cold. They don't want to march through that. Can't even get some bands at the different towns to do it. So that's going to be a scary time for me. I'm thinking about the different, those are the two big ones. But I go into, to start the year, we have Vietnam Veterans Day, then the march. We have Memorial Day. We have, we have D-Day. A lot of these things are from. Oh, the other thing I just went off on a tangent, but one of the things I wanted to say about Veterans Day, when I was growing up, it was really important for my father. He kept saying they can't make it a Monday holiday, which they had done. And they did the same thing for Memorial Day, but the veterans that he was around, and it seemed like a national effort. I was just a kid or a young teenager when he was fighting it, but they said it has to be on the 11th day of the 11th hour and the tradition of that. I don't know how long it took, but I remember that Nixon had signed it, but eventually they reversed it to make it back on the 11th day. And then just recently, it's no longer a required holiday. You can take it as a floater. So there's a diminishing of it.
Well, so I mean, I think, growing up, it's hard to think, that's over 100, World War I ended over 100 years ago. We marked, in Williamsburg, we actually marked Veterans Day that year with, there was a national effort to ring the bells in remembrance of that. But, growing up, whether it's the 60s or 70s, I mean, you're less removed from World War I at that point than you are from World War II right now.
Correct.
So it was significant. That was the Armistice was signed at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. And so there was symbolism in that. And for most of the other allied nations of that, November 11th is actually their version of Memorial Day.
Okay.
Whether it's England or Australia or France, Remembrance Day is November 11th, and that's their Memorial Day. So there is that significance there. It was actually it wasn't Veterans Day until the 1950s. Until the early 1950s, it was Armistice Day.
Right.
And so it was, at that point, really only a holiday to commemorate the end of World War I. In the aftermath of World War II and during Korea, it was recognized that we didn't have a day that honored the living veterans. We had Memorial Day.
Right.
Now in addition, I don't know when it was created, but you have Armed Forces Day in May prior to.
Right.
And so
2 weeks before
those are your
Memorial
three
Day.
big military-related holidays. Veterans Day that honors those who served, Armed Forces Day those who are serving, and Memorial Day for those who died in service to their country. But it is difficult. I mean, that's a lot of holidays that revolve around the same theme, and so it's understandable that people should get confused, particularly because of what we talked about, which is there's kind of some broad, patriotic themed speeches on those days that don't delve much into either the history or if they do, it's only lightly. And so it's understandable that people might not understand the difference. And like you said, Veterans Day is kind of a celebratory holiday, but we have a tendency not to do the parades. I mean, the parades on Memorial Day came out of those solemn processions. They added a band, as time went on, that band started to play things maybe more like John Philip Sousa in the early 1900s that was a little more, celebratory, patriotic, and upbeat. And then you had civic groups start getting involved, because originally it was just the Civil War veterans, then the Civil War veterans and their sons, then the Civil War veterans and their sons, and the Spanish-American War veterans.
Right.
And so it built up over time to get more and more groups involved.
It was funny you brought up the procession in that article that you'd given me, the second anniversary as it started in Northampton and went all the way up to Bergie and around the block. They said in Florence they met up with, I think it said 8 other veterans. They decorated 6 cemetery, 6 graves, and connected with the Haydenville
Brass band.
Brass band. You know, so
Yeah, I mean, I mean, again, it's a different time. I mean, that's one thing we struggle with in Williamsburg is there's no more marching band for Hampshire Regional, so we no longer have a band. There are a small handful of bands in the area, but they're otherwise engaged for those things.
Yeah, we tried to get one for Florence, and I forgot what the amount of money was. It was like, yeah, we don't have that in our budget.
So, I mean, in a way, it kind of is making itself more of a return to a solemn procession, just out of lack of participants. But yeah, as far as the other ones, like Veterans Day, you know, I mean, I think they need to be holidays that engage the public more, because you can't expect people don't know what they don't know. And so, you know, it has to be kind of a collaborative effort of bridging that gap between. And then if the community decides that that's important to them, you know, we certainly feel that it's important because we have our own feelings on it. But it's ultimately a community celebration. And so if the community's not involved, then you're not going to have a significant celebration of any kind for any holiday.
Well, before I was still in school and before I ever went into the Navy and became a veteran coming out, my father was like, why are you rooting me on to have Veterans Day be on Veterans Day? He's like, I don't get it. And I'm like, Dad, think about it. My birthday's the day before. If it's always on the 11th, I'm always going to have the day after my birthday off.
There you go.
He's like, oh, yeah, well, that's a great reason for it. I'll fight just for that. But so I guess I'm guilty of it as well until I became a veteran. But yeah, so like we still have Purple Heart Day in August. We do Pearl Harbor down at the Pearl Harbor Bridge. So we try to do it, but it really is veterans doing it for veterans. And it will get smaller as we have less veterans.
Yeah, I mean, I think to some extent you can only expect people to show up for so many events, and as you listed them off, you know, near a dozen different military or veteran-related celebrations, and so I mean, again, it's how much community involvement is there, and how much do they want to be involved.
The prime example of that, when I took over, my predecessor Bob Kaling says, you got two monuments you got to be concerned with. One's on Florence Road, and one's up on Mount Tom. And I'm like, well, why don't I have to be concerned with Mount Tom? That's in Holyoke. And he's like, well, that was a group, East Hampton, I, and Holyoke took it on, so we got to stick with it. Well, at one time, it was only me. And the other two towns didn't have anybody that would help. Now it's built up again. But they have something every year up there. And nothing happens at the one because there's family. Third generation that still notice it, so they go up every year and have something. So it is up to the community and the descendants to care. And
well, there's a personal connection there, and that's, you know, especially our populations, especially in this area, and I think a lot of areas have become much more mobile. So I work with a couple other organizations in Williamsburg, and the thing that we find is there are a lot fewer people from Williamsburg, and so how do you make it both personal to the place and engage those people who don't have a personal connection to the town? And that's not just a Veterans or Memorial Day thing, that's a community thing in general these days, and that's why you see those organizations shrinking in a lot of ways, is, you know, aside from all of the other, just, you know, we feel we're busier than ever. And I think a lot of people actually overestimate the amount of time necessary to put these things together if we had more people involved. Right now on the Williamsburg Veterans Memorial Committee, we have myself and a Vietnam veteran, and ultimately, whether it's Veterans Day or Memorial Day, I mean, that's it right now. But it's been done so many times that, with the exception of finding, say, a speaker so that you get a little bit of variety each year, it's a checklist, and it's a list of contacts, and yes, sometimes it's contact change, but, you know, with 4 people, it's 4 or 5 phone calls a piece, you know, some emailing. It's not an overly difficult thing, and I think if people understood that aspect, you're not going to be in meetings every month. You're not going to be in meetings every couple weeks. You know, we meet generally. In the past, we've met, you know, once a few months out, and once, you know, maybe a month prior, and then a lot of it's done fairly last minute.
So any people in Williamsburg, Haydenville, you want to get involved, check in with Dan. They could use a little bit more help.
Yeah, we'd be happy to have anybody. You know, it's, again, it doesn't have to be a veteran. It doesn't, you know, it just takes somebody who's got the desire and the willingness to just put a little bit of time in.
Well, so back in the day, when I first became a district and Chesterfield got involved, their VSO, who ended up joining our district, Joe Russo, he was part of the 4th of July parade in
Yep.
Chesterfield. And that always goes on.
Yes.
And I'm in that almost every year. I can't this year, I'm out of state. But, you know, the community expects it. They want to be part of it. And there's people from all over who go
Yeah,
to that parade.
absolutely, yep.
And you're right, I don't think they had a big anniversary one a few years ago, but besides that, it's a lot of the regular people and the thing, and it's just
Yeah.
to you know, for people to go out and mark the day.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you for all your knowledge
Absolutely.
and wisdom on all of this. Really, folks, if your town is doing something, get involved, because as we stated, there's less and less veterans that are living in our communities. They have served, many served 10, 20 years and retire. So without a draft, you just are not making veterans like they did before. That may be a really good thing. I know it's a very stressful thing on those that are now serving. You know, I'm sure you've seen it with people who've done multiple deployments, that it is tough on them. I have my own opinion about the selective service and whether people should serve their country. But right now, it's not many. So if you want to keep these things going to honor veterans, it's really important to just reach out to our office or any of your town offices and say, you know what, I want to assist in honoring veterans, both those that are living veterans and those veterans that have passed. Because without your help, these things won't continue, at least not very large. And if you have opinions about having a different kind of parade, like I was saying, Independence Day, where you can throw candy and have that kind of fun, I'd like to hear from folks. We will be again next month. We'll be back. I'm not sure what the topic is going to be, but I'm sure it'll be something interesting. I hope you all find this show to be interesting. If you have some topic, some subject you'd like me to cover during this show, drop me an email. Again, the email address is vetadmin, VETADMIN, @northamptonma.gov, and tell me what you might like. And you know, I didn't realize I was going to do this show until it was Memorial Day, and I remember talking to Dan going, what do I do about these days and how I mark them, because it's dwindling or it's changing. And it's going to change, and it's inevitable. But doesn't mean they have to disappear. It just means we need more people involved. So thank you all very much for tuning in, and we will see you next month. And thank you, Dan.
Thank you.